Hello everyone, it's Wolfman at Stage Island Library, and today we're going to be having our first edition of Quirky History. And in order to kick off this series, I wanted to do something fun, and I think everyone to some degree can relate to this topic, even if they don't necessarily engage with this topic. They all have probably grandkids or kids, or you grew up yourself playing one of these. So we're going to be going over the first video game console. I think video game history is pretty cool, so let me ask everyone, what do you think that the first video game console was? Do you think it was the Atari Pong? Do you think it was the Atari 2600? Do you think it was a color TV game or the Nintendo Entertainment System? So I'm kind of tricking everyone here. It's actually none of these. For those of you who don't know about the color TV game, this was Nintendo's first foray into the video game console world. It was only released in Japan, and even though it did really well over there, we unfortunately never got it over here in the States, which is kind of a bummer, but that's okay. The first guy that was actually the first home video game console was the Magnavox Odyssey. He was released in 1972 and sold for about $99. And I know some of us out there probably thinking like, oh, $99, that's not bad. Well, with inflation today, he would be worth, if he was released today, everything being the same, be about $600 to buy. So he's pretty expensive when he was released. Even though the Odyssey isn't considered a commercial success like some other video game consoles later would be, he still did really pretty well. He sold 350,000 units by the time Magnavox ended the first series of the Odyssey in 1975. And one of the cool things to think about is when this system was first released, there was no term video game. Video games weren't something that anyone even knew about. There was arcade games, and you had different universities and research institutes who worked with computers and figured out, hey, maybe we can make games on here too. But there was no coining of the term video game until after the Magnavox Odyssey came out. So in order to get people excited about this new system, Magnavox sold it as the new electronic game of the future. And I think that we could all pretty well agree that they were correct. Think of all the consoles that have come afterwards. So how did it work? It's pretty basic for what we would consider a video game console. They had 3 dots on a screen with a vertical line. 2 of those dots were controlled by the players. It did have the ability to have 2-player for some of the games. And the 3rd dot is the computer. The main console itself had 2 dials. One controlled the vertical line, and the other one controlled that computer dot, and then how fast it would go. And there was no sound with this, which to me is pretty interesting to think about. All the video game consoles I've ever played have had sound. So it's interesting to think about that the first one didn't have any sound capability at all. And because it was pretty basic for its graphics, I mean, your character was a dot. There was no like Mario, there was no Link from Zelda. Certainly none of the modern characters that we would think of today on Call of Duty and other games like that. The Magnavox released these plastic overlays for the TV that would give you some sort of background. So it would add more to your experience playing that video game. And they also released it with cards and dice and some other peripherals that someone might think of finding in a board game. So they kind of took these 2 things. They took board games and they meshed it with this new concept of a video game to give the players a more enriching experience so they could understand exactly what a video game could do. It had 28 games, and all 28 games released on 11 game cards. So some cards had more than others. One of the other revolutionary things they did is they had 4 games released with their light gun. And if anyone's ever played Nintendo's Duck Hunt, you get the idea of what the light gun was. It was the separate controller that allowed players to interact with the screen. And so essentially they were one of the first to release a shooter game for at home. And these were basic. You were just interacting again with the dot on the screen, and that was it. And even though I would argue most people have never even heard of Magnavox Odyssey, probably have never seen one. The most important thing it did is it brought video games to the home. You know, you didn't have to go out to an arcade to play an arcade game, which are still fun, but it's kind of hard to bring those home. So the ping pong game that Odyssey created especially inspired Atari. From that, Atari released their home Pong system, and it only had the one game. You could only play Pong, but later on, Atari would create its own console that had other games, and that would lead into things like, you know, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and now later on this year we should have PlayStation 5 and the new Xbox system coming out. So in the span of 40 to 50 years, we have this huge range of growth within the video game world. And I think we can all agree that entertainment in the home hasn't quite been the same since Magnavox Odyssey. So if you like this video, please give us a little thumbs up. If there's some other topic you would like for Quirky History, comment below, and I will see you all next time. Have a good day. Bye.